My classmate ripped up my research and said, "It's impressive a stupid knows how to use ChatGPT." When I asked why they kept mocking me, he snapped his fingers in my face and said, "Hello, Earth to Deaf Boy?" I stayed silent. That was 3 weeks ago. This morning, he was pale, shaking, and flipping through page 247 of the textbook I helped write. My classmates wouldn't listen to my input because I'm deaf. They didn't know I helped write our textbook. I was born deaf since birth, but thanks to parents who taught me I could do whatever hearing people can, I graduated undergrad summa fluid laude with 3 published papers before I was 20, including a chapter in a psychology book that was required reading in one of my grad school classes. I didn't tell my classmates who I was because I was there to learn, not to brag. The lecture hall was massive, so I always brought my ASL interpreter, but for small group meetings in the library study room, I felt comfortable enough with lip reading and speaking to go solo. Josh claimed the head of the table immediately, spreading his materials like he owned the place while Olivia and Ryan flanked him. "So we're analyzing psychological barriers in healthcare settings," Josh announced, then turned to the others, completely blocking his face from my view. I asked him to face me when speaking so I could read his lips. He rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might fall out, then spoke with exaggerated slowness like I was 5 years old. "We are doing healthcare barriers. Do you understand?" Olivia leaned into Ryan whispering something, but she didn't realize I could see her perfectly from my angle. "Great, we get the diversity admit. This is going to tank our grade." Ryan shrugged and said, "At least we'll get points for inclusion. Professor loves that stuff. I've put up with crap like this my whole life, so I wasn't about to let it ruin a project worth 20% of my grade." I just smiled and suggested we could examine communication failures between providers and patients. "What did you say?" Josh mocked, and I could tell by the way he moved his mouth that he was imitating my voice. He turned to the others, laughing. "I literally cannot understand a word. Can you guys?" Olivia shook her head dramatically. "Maybe he can be our silent partner," Ryan added, and they all burst out laughing at their clever wordplay. I decided to give them the benefit of the doubt that they were really having trouble understanding me, so the next meeting I brought typed notes outlining a comprehensive framework for our presentation, complete with citations from leading disability scholars and empirical data from longitudinal studies. Josh grabbed my papers, glanced at them for 2 seconds, then slid them back across the table. "You expect us to believe you wrote this?" he said. Olivia said, "Maybe he had that interpreter who follows him around do it for him." Ryan pulled out his phone and started recording video while zooming in on my face. "Guys, check this out. I'm gonna ask him something." He looked directly at me with false concern. "Hey buddy, let's hear you explain these notes to us." I've been mocked by enough hearing people to know better than to let them record my voice to post it God knows where, so I didn't say anything. Josh took my notes and ripped them up right in front of me. "Look, personally, I think it's impressive that a stupid knows how to use ChatGPT," he said with his poop-eating grin, "but our professor won't." For the next few sessions, they kept planning this lackluster presentation, all the while shooting me down every time I tried to contribute. I knew what they were coming up with was C- material at best, and I didn't want them bringing down my average, so during our final planning session, I tried one more time to help. I brought a draft introduction that connected our topic to broader themes in disability justice. Josh literally put his hand in my face to stop me from talking. He said, "Listen." "Oh wait, you can't listen," he laughed. "We've decided you're going to stand there and smile while we present. Don't try to talk, don't try to sign, just be decorative. You'll still get credit on our project. You should be thanking us." "He probably doesn't even know what we're saying right now," Olivia said while looking directly at me. "Look at him just staring. The lights are on, but nobody's home." Ryan pretended to sign random gestures. "Look, I'm speaking his language. Herp derp, me make random hand movements." They all laughed hysterically. Josh leaned back in his chair studying me like I was a specimen. "You know what's sad? He probably thinks he's smart. We should get extra credit for dealing with this," Ryan said. "Like hazard pay. Do you think he even knows we're talking about him?" Josh snapped his fingers in my face repeatedly. "Hello? Earth to Deaf Boy?" They assigned me to make a single PowerPoint slide for the references page, but I went home that night and made something a little different. The presentation day arrived, and I walked to the front of the lecture hall with my interpreter, standing exactly where they'd told me to stand, while Josh stepped up to the podium ready to take charge. But before he could speak, I moved to the center and began signing rapidly to my interpreter, who voiced clearly to the packed auditorium. "Good morning. Before my group begins, I'd like to present my own research on the psychological barriers faced by disabled students in academic settings, drawing from my published work in our textbook, page 247 through 268, which I believe you're all familiar with." The blood drained from Josh's face as he frantically flipped through his textbook, finding my name and photo in the acknowledgments section. "I'll be using this group's treatment of their deaf colleague, meticulously documented over the past 3 weeks, as a case study in academic ableism." Horror dawned on their faces as they realized every cruel word, every mocking gesture, every moment they thought I was too stupid to understand was about to bite them in the butt. I clicked to the next slide, revealing screenshots of their group chat messages where they'd called me everything from the mute to dead weight to words I won't repeat here. The auditorium fell completely silent, except for the sound of my interpreter's steady voice translating my signs. As you can see from these messages dated October 3rd, my group members believed that my deafness made me, and I quote, "basically brain dead." They also discussed strategies to minimize my participation, including physically blocking their faces during discussions to prevent lip reading. Professor Polly, who'd been grading papers at her desk, slowly stood up and moved closer to the projection screen. Her expression shifted from mild interest to genuine concern as she read the messages. I continued signing while my interpreter voiced for me. This next slide shows video evidence from October 10th. The screen displayed Ryan's recording of himself making mock sign language gestures while the others laughed. I'd managed to get a copy when he accidentally shared it to our group folder before quickly deleting it. Technology has a funny way of preserving things people want to forget. Josh stepped forward, his face red. "Professor, this is completely out of context. We were just joking around. He's being way too sensitive." Professor Polly held up her hand to silence him, her eyes still fixed on the screen. "Mr. Hughes, please continue your presentation." I clicked to the next slide, which showed my original research proposal that Josh had torn up, carefully taped back together and scanned. This was my contribution to our group's initial planning session. As you can see from the timestamp, it was submitted 3 weeks before our final presentation outline, which bears remarkable similarity to my ideas despite my group's insistence that my work was, quote, ChatGPT garbage. Olivia grabbed Ryan's arm, whispering frantically. I could read her lips perfectly. How did he get all of this? The next slide answered her question. It was an email thread between me and Professor Polly from the beginning of the semester, where I'd informed her about my accommodation needs and my concerns about group work. Her response was professional but clear. Document everything and keep her informed if issues arose. Following Professor Polly's advice, I documented every interaction with my group. This wasn't about revenge or causing drama. This was about ensuring that my academic contributions were recognized and that discriminatory behavior didn't impact my grade. I clicked through several more slides showing my attempted contributions, each one rejected or ignored. There were timestamps, dates, and even security footage from the library showing Josh ripping up my notes. The library cameras had caught everything beautifully. Ryan tried to slip toward the exit, but Professor Polly's teaching assistant moved to block the door. The TA had been in the library during several of our meetings and had witnessed some of the behavior firsthand. The irony, I continued signing, is that while my group members were so focused on my disability, they failed to notice the quality of their own work. This next section will demonstrate the significant gaps in their research methodology. I pulled up their original presentation slides, the ones they'd planned to present today. Even from where I stood, I could see Josh's laptop open on his desk, the same slides queued up and ready to go. But now, instead of presenting them as cutting-edge research, I was about to dissect every flaw. Their literature review cites only 3 sources, 2 of which are blog posts, and 1 is a Wikipedia article. For a graduate-level presentation on healthcare barriers, this is inadequate. Furthermore, their proposed methodology involves surveying, quote, random people at the mall, which lacks both scientific rigor and ethical approval. Professor Polly was taking notes now, her pen moving quickly across her grade sheet. Other students in the class had their phones out, not to record me mockingly like Ryan had done, but to capture what was turning into a masterclass in academic accountability. In contrast, I signed, moving to my next slide, here is a comprehensive analysis of healthcare communication barriers, drawing from my published research and additional peer-reviewed sources. Josh just learned why you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, especially when that book literally helped write your textbook. Talk about failing the reading comprehension test before class even started. This includes data from a 2-year longitudinal study I co-authored as an undergraduate, which was published in the Journal of Healthcare Communication. The slide showed the journal article with my name clearly listed as second author. Several students gasped when they recognized the journal, one of the most prestigious in our field. Josh's voice cracked as he tried to interject. This is harassment. He's attacking us publicly. Professor Polly finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Davidson, you'll have your opportunity to respond after Mr. Hughes completes his presentation. Please sit down. Josh slumped into his chair, exchanging panicked looks with Olivia and Ryan. They'd thought they were so clever, treating me like I was invisible, like my deafness made me less capable. They'd assigned me to make a references slide, probably thinking I'd mess up even that simple task. Instead, I'd prepared a 20-minute presentation that was about to change everything. I continued through my slides, each one building a stronger case. There were emails where they'd deliberately scheduled meetings when they knew my interpreter wasn't available. Screenshots of them using voice-only communication tools, despite my repeated requests for text-based alternatives. Even a particularly damning message where Josh had bragged to someone else about carrying the deaf kid through the class. This behavior isn't just personally hurtful, I signed, my interpreter's voice steady and clear. It represents a systemic failure to provide equal access to education. When group members actively exclude a teammate based on disability, they're not just compromising the quality of their work, they're violating federal law. I saw Professor Polly write something in large letters across her grade sheet. From my angle, it looked like academic misconduct review, but I couldn't be entirely sure. For my final slide, I signed, I want to address something Josh said during our last meeting. He told me I should be grateful that they were letting me get credit for their work. He suggested I was lucky to be included at all. The final slide appeared, showing a side-by-side comparison. On the left was their planned presentation, all 15 slides of it, with its sparse citations and questionable methodology. On the right was my complete presentation, 45 slides of rigorous research, proper citations, and innovative approaches to healthcare communication barriers. The question is, I signed, pausing for effect, who exactly was carrying whom? The auditorium erupted. Students were talking excitedly, some applauding, others pulling out their textbooks to find my chapter. Professor Polly stood up, commanding attention. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. That was illuminating. Mr. Davidson, Ms. Williams, Mr. Park, please see me in my office immediately after class. The rest of you are dismissed early today. As students filed out, many stopped to shake my hand or sign thank you in ASL, which surprised me. Apparently, some had been learning basic signs throughout the semester. I gathered my materials while Josh, Olivia, and Ryan remained frozen in their seats, apparently trying to process what had just happened. My interpreter leaned in close. That was brilliant, she whispered. I've been watching them treat you like garbage for weeks. It was unaliving me not to say anything. I nodded my thanks to her. She'd been professional throughout, never letting on that she understood every cruel thing they'd said about me, even when they assumed she couldn't hear them from across the room. Her poker face had been essential to documenting everything. As I headed for the door, Professor Polly caught my eye and signed, "Good job" in ASL. My jaw nearly hit the floor. In all our interactions, she'd never indicated she knew sign language. The surprise must have shown on my face because she smiled slightly and signed, "My daughter is deaf." I've been watching this situation closely. That's when I realized the full scope of what had just happened. This wasn't just about me standing up to some bullies. Professor Polly had been aware the entire time, had told me to document everything, had perhaps even strategically placed her TA in the library during our meetings. She'd given my tormentors enough rope to hang themselves academically. As I left the lecture hall, I passed Josh, Olivia, and Ryan still sitting in stunned silence. Josh looked up at me, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. His mouth moved like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. For once, he knew exactly how it felt to have something important to communicate and not be heard. I didn't gloat. I didn't sign anything sarcastic or clever. I just walked past them toward toward my next class, where I had a linguistics exam on the structure of ASL. It was one of my favorite subjects, analyzing the grammar and syntax of my native language. After weeks of being treated like I was intellectually inferior, I was looking forward to acing another test. The hallway was buzzing with chatter about what had just happened. News travels fast in graduate programs, and I could already see people pulling up my textbook chapter on their phones. By tomorrow, everyone would know not just what my group had done, but who I really was academically. But I wasn't thinking about tomorrow yet. I was thinking about how my parents would react when I called them tonight. They'd taught me to be proud of being deaf, to never let anyone make me feel less capable. They'd be proud that I'd stood up for myself, but probably even prouder that I'd done it through academic excellence rather than anger. As I walked across campus, I reflected on how this whole situation had started. I'd joined the graduate program genuinely excited to learn, to contribute, to grow as a scholar. I'd kept my publications quiet, not out of shame, but out of humility, wanting to be judged on my current work rather than past achievements. But Josh, Olivia, and Ryan had made assumptions the moment they saw my interpreter, had written me off before I'd signed a single word. Their loss, really. If they'd actually collaborated with me, we could have created something exceptional. My research combined with their, well, whatever skills they might have had, could have resulted in a presentation that impressed everyone. Instead, they'd chosen mockery over merit, cruelty over collaboration. I made a mental note to email Professor Polly my full presentation slides later. Something told me she'd want to review them carefully, perhaps even suggest I present the complete version at the department's research symposium next month. It would be a good opportunity to share my work with a wider audience, and this time, I wouldn't hold back on mentioning my publications. The linguistics exam went smoothly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Josh, Olivia, and Ryan weren't done with me yet. My suspicions proved correct when I arrived at my apartment that evening to find an official university envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a formal complaint filed with the Office of Student Conduct, alleging that I had violated academic integrity policies by presenting work outside the scope of our assigned project and deliberately sabotaging my group members' academic performance. The complaint bore all three of their signatures, along with a lengthy statement claiming I had refused to participate in group meetings, failed to complete my assigned tasks, and then ambushed them with an unauthorized presentation designed to humiliate them publicly. They'd even included screenshots of our group chat, carefully edited to remove their discriminatory comments while preserving only my minimal responses, making it appear as though I'd been uncooperative from the start. I spent the next hour photographing every page of the complaint and backing up all my documentation to multiple cloud services. Years of dealing with discrimination had taught me that evidence has a way of disappearing when people feel cornered. Sure enough, when I checked our shared group folder later that night, I discovered that Josh had removed me from the project and deleted all the meeting recordings I'd uploaded for transparency. Fortunately, I'd anticipated this possibility and maintained personal copies of everything. The next morning, I submitted a counter-complaint to the Office of Student Conduct, attaching the full, unedited group chat logs, the video of Ryan mocking sign language, and timestamps showing when files had been deleted from our shared folder. I also included a detailed timeline of events, cross-referenced with library security footage timestamps and my interpreter's schedule. The formal investigation process meant both parties would remain in class during the review, which created an uncomfortable dynamic. Josh seemed to interpret this as a sign that his complaint was being taken seriously, and his confidence returned with a vengeance. During the next class session, he made a point of sitting directly behind me, occasionally tapping my shoulder and mouthing exaggerated words when I turned around, then immediately looking away innocently when my interpreter glanced over. Olivia and Ryan flanked him as usual, but I noticed something different about their body language. While Josh leaned forward aggressively, they seemed to shrink into their seats, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The reality of a formal investigation appeared to be sinking in for them, even if Josh remained oblivious. Professor Polly conducted class as usual, but I caught her observing the dynamics with sharp attention. When she assigned new group projects, she made a point of allowing students to select their own groups. Josh immediately raised his hand and announced loudly that his group was full, even though no one had approached him yet. Several students snickered, and I realized the story of our presentation had spread beyond just casual hallway gossip. How does Josh think changing the story will work when there's so much proof? The way he deleted those files right after filing that complaint makes me wonder if he really believes his own lies or if he's just hoping something will stick. I ended up working with 3 other students who approached me after class. Pearl, a second-year student who'd been in the audience during my presentation, signed a basic reading in ASL, which she'd apparently been practicing. Jonathan, who'd witnessed some of our library meetings while studying nearby, offered to share his own notes about what he'd observed. Nathan, who'd been in Josh's undergraduate program, simply shook his head and muttered something about Josh finally getting what was coming to him. Our group's project focused on accessibility and mental health services, a topic that allowed me to contribute meaningfully without dominating the discussion. Pearl suggested we meet in a different library study room, one with better sightlines and a round table that made lip reading easier. Jonathan started taking notes on his laptop and automatically turned the screen so I could follow along. Nathan learned to tap the table gently to get my attention instead of calling out. Small accommodations that made a world of difference. Meanwhile, Josh's new group seemed to be struggling. I overheard other students talking about how he'd tried to recruit the top performers in class, but they'd all mysteriously had scheduling conflicts. He'd ended up with 3 first-year students who seemed intimidated by his aggressive leadership style. During one library session, I watched from across the room as he gestured wildly at his laptop screen, while his group members sat in silence, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The investigation interviews began the following week. I met with the conduct officer, Dr. Patterson, who asked detailed questions about each incident. My interpreter was present, but Dr. Patterson surprised me by signing her introduction, explaining that she'd taken ASL courses as part of her diversity training. She'd already reviewed the security footage I'd referenced and confirmed that the library cameras had indeed captured Josh destroying my notes. She asked about my communication needs and whether I'd made them clear to my group. I showed her my email to the group from the first week, outlining my preferences for text-based communication and explaining how to ensure I could participate fully in discussions. questions. Josh had responded to that email with a thumbs-up emoji, which Dr. Patterson noted with interest. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Patterson informed me that 2 other students had come forward with similar complaints about Josh from previous semesters. Apparently, his pattern of dominating group projects and marginalizing teammates wasn't new, but no one had documented it as thoroughly as I had. The office was now considering whether this constituted a pattern of behavior requiring more serious intervention. Josh must have sensed the investigation wasn't going his way because his classroom behavior escalated dramatically. He started bringing a laser pointer to class, allegedly for presentations, but used it to flash light near my peripheral vision whenever Professor Polly faced the board. When I changed seats, he followed. When I moved to the front row, he complained loudly that he couldn't see past my interpreter. His harassment extended beyond the classroom. I found anonymous notes slipped under my office door with crude drawings of ears with X's through them. Someone kept signing me up for spam email lists with offensive names. My student mailbox was stuffed with printouts of job postings for simple jobs that didn't require communication. The handwriting was different each time, but the printer codes at the bottom all traced back to the same computer lab where Josh worked part-time. I documented everything meticulously, creating a new folder titled Post-Presentation Harassment and organizing incidents by date, time, and type. My interpreter started taking photos of Josh's behavior during class after Professor Polly quietly gave her permission to document any disruptions to my learning environment. The situation reached a boiling point during a department mixer 3 weeks after my presentation. These informal gatherings were meant to foster collegial relationships between graduate students and faculty, but Josh saw it as an opportunity for revenge. He positioned himself near the food table where everyone would eventually pass by, then started loudly telling anyone who'd listen about how he was being persecuted by the university for trying to help a disabled student. His version of events painted me as an ungrateful charity case who'd betrayed his generosity by filing false complaints. He claimed he'd spent hours creating special accommodations for me, only to have me turn around and accuse him of discrimination. Several faculty members looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene, perhaps unsure of what they could say while an investigation was pending. I was across the room when Pearl rushed over, tapping my shoulder urgently. She'd been close enough to hear Josh's latest fabrication, where he claimed I'd threatened him and his family if he didn't give me credit for work I hadn't done. The accusation was so outrageous that several students who knew me started laughing, but Josh pressed on, his voice growing louder and more agitated. That's when Nathan stepped forward. Normally quiet and reserved, he cleared his throat and announced that he'd been in Josh's undergraduate research methods class 2 years earlier. In that class, Josh had similarly marginalized a teammate with a chronic illness, claiming she was faking her condition to avoid work. The pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. Josh's face flushed red as he spun around to confront Nathan, but found himself facing a small crowd of students who'd apparently been waiting for someone to speak up. One by one, they shared their own experiences. A student from his statistics class described how Josh had submitted a group paper without including her name, claiming she hadn't contributed enough. Another recalled him deliberately scheduling meetings during her work shifts, then complaining to the professor about her absence. The faculty members present exchanged meaningful glances. Dr. Wakes, the department chair, stepped forward and suggested that perhaps this wasn't the appropriate venue for such discussions. Her tone was neutral, but I caught her making notes on her phone as she ushered Josh toward the exit. He left, still protesting his innocence, with Olivia and Ryan trailing behind him like lost puppies. The next few days were tense. Josh seemed to realize his public outburst had damaged his credibility, so he shifted tactics. Instead of overt harassment, he began a campaign of subtle sabotage. My reserved library books went missing. The accessible study room I'd booked for my new group was mysteriously double-booked every time. Someone kept adjusting the height of the chair at my usual computer station, a petty but annoying disruption. More seriously, I discovered that someone had attempted to access my student account multiple times, triggering a security lockout. The IT department traced the attempts to the same computer lab where Josh worked during his shift hours. They couldn't prove it was him specifically, but the timing was suspicious enough that they revoked his lab monitor privileges pending investigation. This cascade of consequences seemed to finally crack Olivia and Ryan's loyalty. I was studying in the library when Olivia approached my table alone, fidgeting nervously with her backpack straps. She gestured to ask if she could sit, and I nodded cautiously. Through a combination of written notes and carefully enunciated speech, she explained that she wanted to amend her statement to the conduct office. She admitted that Josh had pressured them to file the complaint, threatening to tell Professor Polly that they'd been complicit in discriminating against me if they didn't support his version of events. She'd gone along with it out of fear, but watching his behavior escalate had made her realize she was on the wrong side. She showed me text messages where Josh had instructed her and Ryan on exactly what to write in their statements, even providing specific phrases to use. I thanked her for coming forward but maintained my distance. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. She seemed to understand, sliding a written apology across the table before leaving. The note was genuine, acknowledging specific incidents and taking responsibility for her actions rather than just blaming Josh's influence. I photographed it and added it to my documentation folder. Ryan's defection came 2 days later, though his was less apologetic and more self-preserving. He sent an email to Dr. Patterson officially withdrawing his support for Josh's complaint and requesting to submit an amended statement. He claimed he'd been misled about the situation and wanted to correct any misunderstandings. Classic covering your own backside behavior, but it still helped my case. Josh's isolation was nearly complete, but he wasn't finished yet. During our next class, he attempted one final desperate gambit. He raised his hand during Professor Polly's lecture and announced that he wanted to present additional research on healthcare barriers, specifically focusing on patients who fake or exaggerate disabilities for personal gain. The room went silent as everyone turned to stare at him. Professor Polly's expression remained neutral as she reminded him that spontaneous presentations weren't part of the course structure. Josh persisted, claiming it was directly relevant to our recent group project and that the class deserved to hear both sides of the issue. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly recognizing this as another attack on me. That's when when something unexpected happened. My new group members, without any prompting from me, stood up one by one. Pearl signed no while shaking her head firmly. Josh tried to paint himself as the victim at a party full of witnesses who knew better. That's like trying to convince people the sky is green while standing outside on a clear day. Jonathan closed his laptop with a decisive snap. Nathan gathered his materials and moved toward the door. Other students began following suit, recognizing Josh's proposal for what it was, a thinly veiled attempt at retaliation. Within minutes, over half the class had stood up in silent protest. Professor Pauly watched this unfold with interest, then announced that perhaps it was time for a break. As students filed out, she asked Josh to remain behind. Through the classroom door's window, I could see her speaking to him with the kind of controlled intensity that suggested his academic future was being seriously reconsidered. The formal conduct hearing was scheduled for the following week. I spent days preparing my presentation, organizing evidence chronologically, and creating a clear narrative of escalating discrimination. My interpreter helped me practice, suggesting ways to ensure my signing remained clear and measured, even when discussing the most hurtful incidents. We both knew that maintaining composure would be crucial to my credibility. Dr. Patterson had warned me that Josh would be present at the hearing and would have the opportunity to respond to my evidence. The thought of facing him in such a formal setting was daunting, but I reminded myself that I'd already confronted him once in front of a much larger audience. This time, I had the weight of documented evidence and institutional support behind me. The night before the hearing, I received an unexpected email from Professor Pauly. She wanted me to know that regardless of the hearing's outcome, she was nominating me for the department's Excellence in Research Award based on my published work and the quality of analysis I'd demonstrated in my presentation. She also mentioned that several faculty members had expressed interest in having me guest lecture on accessibility in healthcare settings. This recognition meant more to me than any punishment Josh might face. Throughout this ordeal, I'd been fighting not just for justice, but for acknowledgement that my contributions had value, that my perspective mattered, that my deafness didn't diminish my capabilities. Professor Pauly's email confirmed that at least some people understood this. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and drizzly, matching my anxious mood. I dressed professionally, gathered my materials, and met my interpreter at the student conduct office. We reviewed my main points one final time, and she reminded me to breathe deeply if I felt overwhelmed. Her steady presence was reassuring as we entered the conference room. Josh was already there, sitting at the opposite end of a long table with a student advocate beside him. He'd clearly made an effort to appear professional and contrite, wearing a suit and keeping his expression neutral. But I caught the flash of anger in his eyes when I walked in, quickly masked, but unmistakable. Olivia and Ryan were notably absent, having submitted written statements instead of appearing in person. Dr. Patterson explained the hearing procedures, emphasizing that this was an educational process focused on accountability and growth rather than punishment. She outlined the charges against each party: my complaint of disability discrimination and harassment, and Josh's counter-complaint of academic sabotage. The hearing would examine evidence for both claims and determine appropriate outcomes. I presented first, walking through each incident methodically: the destroyed notes, the mocking videos, the edited group communications, the pattern of exclusion and humiliation. I kept my signing calm and precise, letting the evidence speak for itself. My interpreter's voice remained steady as she conveyed not just my words, but the measured tone I was striving to maintain. When I showed the security footage of Josh ripping up my research notes, his advocate whispered urgently in his ear. When I displayed the full group chat logs with timestamps, Josh's face cycled through various shades of red. By the time I reached the post-presentation harassment, including the IT department's findings about the attempted account access, he was slumped in his chair, all pretense of innocence abandoned. Josh's defense, when his turn came, was a mixture of denial, deflection, and eventually, desperate bargaining. He claimed the torn notes were a misunderstanding, that he thought they were scratch paper. The mocking videos were taken out of context and were actually attempts at humor to lighten the mood. The group chat messages were poorly worded, but not intentionally discriminatory. Each excuse fell flat against the weight of documented evidence. His advocate tried to shift focus to my presentation, arguing that I'd ambushed the group and violated their privacy by sharing personal communications. Dr. Patterson asked whether Josh believed students had a reasonable expectation of privacy when engaging in discriminatory behavior in university spaces. The question hung in the air unanswered. As the hearing progressed, Josh's composure crumbled entirely. He accused me of planning this from the beginning, of infiltrating his group specifically to destroy his academic career. He claimed I'd manipulated Professor Pauly with my sob story about being deaf, that I used my disability as a weapon to get special treatment. The more he spoke, the more he revealed his true beliefs about disability and accommodation. Dr. Patterson finally called for a recess, during which Josh's advocate could be heard urgently counseling him to stop talking. When we reconvened, Josh offered a stilted apology that felt more like damage control than genuine remorse. He said he regretted any misunderstandings and was sorry if anyone felt offended by his actions. The classic non-apology of someone who's only sorry they got caught. The hearing concluded with Dr. Patterson informing us that the conduct board would review all evidence and issue their decision within 5 business days. As we filed out, Josh attempted to approach me, but his advocate quickly steered him away. Whatever he'd wanted to say would remain unspoken, which was probably for the best. The 5 days waiting for the conduct board's decision crawled by with agonizing slowness. I threw myself into my coursework, spending extra hours in the library working on my new group's project. Pearl had found fascinating research on visual communication tools in therapy settings, which dovetailed perfectly with my own work on healthcare accessibility. Jonathan compiled case studies while Nathan interviewed local practitioners about their experiences with deaf patients. During one of our meetings, I noticed Josh watching us from across the library. He sat alone at a corner table, his usual confident posture replaced by something hunched and defensive. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away, gathering his materials and leaving through the far exit. The other students in the library tracked his movement with obvious interest, and I realized how thoroughly his reputation had shifted. Professor Pauly maintained her professional demeanor in class, but I caught subtle changes in how she structured discussions sessions. She now made a point of facing the room when speaking, checking that everyone could see her clearly. She'd started using more visual aids and written summaries on the board, small adjustments that benefited everyone, not just me, but I recognized them as deliberate choices. The conduct board's decision arrived via email on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the graduate student lounge when the notification popped up, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the PDF attachment. My interpreter sat beside me, reading over my shoulder as we absorbed the findings together. The board had found Josh responsible for multiple violations: disability-based harassment, creating a hostile educational environment, academic misconduct related to destroying another student's work, and a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning multiple semesters. His consequences were severe but fair: immediate failure of the group project grade, mandatory completion of a comprehensive disability awareness program, academic probation for the remainder of his graduate studies, and required supervision for all future group work. More significantly, the board mandated that Josh write a formal letter of apology to be read aloud in our class, acknowledging his specific actions and their impact. He would also be required to complete 40 hours of community service with a disability advocacy organization, with progress reports submitted monthly to the conduct office. Olivia and Ryan received lesser sanctions, formal warnings, and required attendance at diversity training workshops. Their amended statements had mitigated their involvement somewhat, but the board noted their complicity in enabling Josh's behavior. They would need to complete reflection essays on bystander intervention and submit them to Dr. Patterson. As for Josh's complaint against me, the board dismissed it entirely. They found that my presentation fell within the scope of the assignment to analyze psychological barriers in healthcare, and that I had every right to use my personal experiences as a case study. They specifically commended my thorough documentation and professional handling of a hostile situation. The relief I felt was immediately followed by exhaustion. The stress of the past weeks crashed over me all at once, and I realized how much energy I'd been expending just to maintain my composure. My interpreter squeezed my shoulder gently, signing that she was proud of how I'd handled everything. Word of the decision spread quickly through the department. That evening, I received emails from several faculty members expressing their support and interest in my research. Dr. Wakes, the department chair, invited me to present at the upcoming graduate student symposium, suggesting my work on healthcare communication barriers would be valuable for the broader academic community. The way Professor Polly quietly changed how she teaches after all this happened is really interesting. Did she realize those small changes, like facing the room and using more visual aids, would help everyone learn better, not just deaf students? The following Monday brought the mandated apology. Josh stood at the front of our classroom, his typed statement clutched in shaking hands. Professor Polly introduced the moment with gravity, explaining that the class would witness an important lesson in accountability and growth. Josh's voice cracked as he began reading. He acknowledged each specific incident: the destroyed notes, the mocking videos, the deliberate exclusion from group discussions. He admitted to making assumptions based on my deafness and failing to recognize my capabilities. He expressed understanding that his actions had violated both university policy and basic human decency. The apology felt rehearsed and uncomfortable, clearly crafted with help from his advocate to hit all the required points. But when he reached the final paragraph, something shifted. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he admitted that his behavior stemmed from his own insecurities about his academic performance and fear of being overshadowed. He'd seen my disability as an easy target for his frustrations, a way to maintain his sense of superiority. When he finished, the classroom sat in absolute silence. Professor Polly thanked him for his statement and directed him to return to his seat. I noticed several students shifting away from him, creating a subtle but unmistakable zone of isolation around his desk. The social consequences of his actions would likely persist far longer than the formal sanctions. After class, Pearl approached me with an idea. She'd been researching accessibility initiatives at other universities and wanted to propose a peer mentorship program for students with disabilities in our department. She asked if I'd be interested in helping develop the proposal, maybe even serving as one of the founding mentors. The idea energized me in a way I hadn't felt since before this whole ordeal began. Over the next few weeks, our small planning committee grew. Jonathan contributed his technical skills to design an accessible online platform for the program. Nathan leveraged his connections with the undergraduate program to identify potential mentees. Even some faculty members offered to serve as advisors, including Professor Polly, who revealed she'd been advocating for such a program for years, but needed student leadership to make it happen. Josh's community service placement was announced in the department newsletter. He would be working with a local deaf community center, helping to organize their educational outreach programs. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I learned from a friend who volunteered there that his first day had been rough. He'd arrived with his usual swagger, only to find himself completely out of his depth in an environment where ASL was the primary language and he was the one who needed accommodation. The center's director, a deaf woman who'd built the organization from the ground up, apparently assigned him to work with their youth program. He spent his hours helping deaf children with homework, forced to communicate through basic gestures and written notes. The tables had turned completely, and he was experiencing firsthand the frustration of being unable to communicate effectively in his preferred mode. Reports filtered back through the volunteer network. Josh struggled initially, making mistakes and occasionally reverting to his old attitudes. But the children, with the blunt honesty of youth, called him out every time. One 8-year-old girl apparently informed him that he signed like a baby, which became a running joke among the volunteers. Slowly, painfully, he began to learn not just ASL, but humility. Meanwhile, my new group's presentation on accessibility and mental health services was taking shape beautifully. We decided to include a practical component, creating a toolkit for therapists working with deaf clients. Pearl coordinated with local mental health providers to test our materials, while Jonathan built an interactive website to host our resources. Nathan compiled feedback from the deaf community about their experiences with mental health services. The night before our presentation, I received an unexpected email. It was from Josh, sent from his personal account rather than his university one. The subject line read simply, "No response needed." Inside, he'd written a different kind of apology, less formal, but more genuine. He admitted he'd been watching our group work together and realized what he'd missed out on by choosing discrimination over collaboration. He'd attached a resource he'd found during his community service, a research paper on reducing communication barriers in educational settings that he thought might be useful for our project. I stared at the email for a long time, unsure how to feel. The resources were actually helpful, directly relevant to our work, but I couldn't shake the memory of him ripping up my notes, of his cruel laughter, of weeks of harassment. My interpreter, who'd stopped by to review our presentation one last time, noticed my expression and asked what was wrong. When I showed her the email, she signed thoughtfully that growth was possible for everyone, but trust, once broken, took much longer to rebuild. Our presentation day arrived with clear skies and spring warmth, the auditorium filled with students and faculty eager to see what we'd created. As I stood at the front with my group, I felt a different energy than during my confrontation with Josh. This wasn't about exposing wrongdoing or seeking justice. This was about sharing knowledge, building bridges, creating something positive from a negative experience. Pearl introduced our project with natural confidence, her ASL much improved from months of practice. Jonathan demonstrated our digital toolkit, showing how therapists could use visual aids and written communication to better serve deaf clients. Nathan presented our community feedback, including powerful testimonials about the impact of accessible mental health services. I concluded with recommendations for systemic changes, drawing from my published research and our collective findings. The audience response was enthusiastic. Faculty members asked thoughtful questions about implementation. Students approached us afterward wanting to learn more, some even asking about ASL classes. Dr. Wakes announced that our toolkit would be officially adopted by the University Counseling Center, with plans to expand it for other disabilities. As we packed up our materials, I noticed Josh sitting in the back row. He'd attended our presentation, taking notes throughout. When our eyes met, he offered a small nod, not seeking forgiveness or friendship, just acknowledging what we'd accomplished. I nodded back, nothing more, then turned to celebrate with my group. That evening, the department hosted a reception for all the presentation groups. The atmosphere was collegial and warm, with faculty and students mingling freely. Professor Pauly pulled me aside to inform me that the Excellence in Research Award Committee had made their decision. I would be recognized at the end-of-year ceremony, with a monetary prize that would help fund my continued research. She also mentioned that several other universities had reached out after hearing about our accessibility toolkit, interested in adapting it for their own counseling centers. What had started as a class project was gaining momentum beyond our campus. The thought filled me with pride, not the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but the deeper fulfillment of creating meaningful change. As the semester drew to a close, I reflected on how much had changed since that first group meeting in the library. Josh still attended classes, but his former swagger had been replaced by quiet attention. He'd formed a new study group with other students on academic probation, and by all accounts was working harder than ever before. His community service reports showed gradual improvement in his ASL skills and attitude. Olivia and Ryan had completed their diversity training and submitted their reflection essays. I'd heard through the grapevine that Olivia had joined the Disability Services Student Advisory Board, seemingly genuine in her desire to prevent others from making her mistakes. Ryan had quietly switched to a different section of the course for the following semester, avoiding further contact. The peer mentorship program Pearl and I had proposed was approved for a pilot launch in the fall. We'd secured funding, recruited volunteer mentors, and partnered with disability services to identify incoming students who could benefit. I found myself looking forward to working with new deaf and hard of hearing graduate students, sharing not just academic strategies, but the confidence to stand up for themselves. On the last day of classes, I cleaned out my study carrel in the library. The same space where I'd spent so many hours documenting harassment and preparing my defense now held notes for future research projects and mentorship materials. The security camera that had captured Josh destroying my work still blinked steadily overhead, but I no longer noticed it with the same vigilance. As I walked across campus toward the parking lot, my phone vibrated with a text from my parents. They were driving up for the awards ceremony next week, proud beyond words. My mother had already told everyone in our deaf community about what had happened, turning me into something of a reluctant local hero. I'd have to remind her again that I didn't want to become some kind of symbol or inspiration. I just wanted to be a scholar who happened to be deaf, contributing to my field like anyone else. The spring air carried the scent of blooming flowers and fresh possibilities. Next year would bring new challenges, comprehensive exams, dissertation proposals, the pressure of academic job markets. But I felt ready in a way I hadn't before. The experience with Josh had taught me valuable lessons about documentation, self-advocacy, and the power of community support. Josh signing like a baby, according to an 8-year-old, is the kind of reality check money can't buy. Imagine going from classroom bully to getting roasted by kids who actually know the language you're butchering. I thought about the 8-year-old girl at the deaf center who told Josh he signed like a baby. She was growing up in a world where accommodations were legally mandated, where technology made communication easier, where deaf people could be professors and doctors and anything else they chose. But she'd still face discrimination, still encounter people who would make assumptions about her capabilities based on her deafness. Maybe that's why the mentorship program felt so important, not just for academic support, but to show students like her that they could navigate these challenges without losing themselves in bitterness or accepting less than they deserved. They could stand firm in their worth while still leaving room for others to grow and change. My interpreter met me at my car, ready to head home after a long day. She'd been more than a professional support through all of this. She'd been a witness, an ally, and eventually a friend. As we drove off campus, she signed that she was proud of how everything had turned out. Not just the formal vindication or the academic recognition, but the way I'd channeled a negative experience into positive action. The sun was setting as I arrived home, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow would bring more work on the mentorship program, final revisions to our accessibility toolkit, preparation for summer research. But tonight, I simply sat on my porch and enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of a battle well fought and a future full of possibility. The story that began with discrimination and mockery had transformed into something larger, a catalyst for change that would ripple outward in ways I couldn't yet imagine. You know what really gets me? It's It's how that one little girl at the deaf center ended up being the spark for such a huge shift in perspective. Wild how something so small can change everything. Like the video, it helps more than you think.